Everyone's talking about AI these days, right? This season on Compiler, we're diving deep into how AI is reshaping the world we live in. Join us for a new season of Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Between client meetings, managing your business, and everyday tasks, who has time to worry about website hosting? With Kinsta's managed WordPress hosting, you don't have to. They handle the technical stuff, delivering lightning-fast load times, enterprise-grade security, and 24/7 365 human-only support. Simply switching to Kinsta could make your site up to 200% faster. Kinsta's custom dashboard makes managing sites easy, with powerful features designed to save you time and effort. Plus, their free expert-led migrations ensure a smooth transition. Ready to see why Kinsta is trusted by thousands of businesses? Get your first month free at kinsta.com. That's KINSTA.com. Kinsta, simply better hosting.
Coming up on episode 329 of Wheel Bearings, we got the Chevy Colorado Trail Boss, the Kia EV9, the Nissan Leaf, the first drive of the Chevy Blazer EV, GM's new infotainment system, the Cadillac Vistiq. The LA Sheriff's Department still has a strategic reserve of Crown Victorias, anti-drink driving tech, the Tesla autopilot recall, and much more. All that coming up next. This is episode 329 of Wheel Bearings. I'm Sam Abul-Sandwich from Guidehouse Insights.
I'm Stephanie Brinley from S&P Global Mobility.
And let's see, Robbie is in New York this weekend with his wife, having a little holiday cheer. And Nicole is still cruising up and down some kind of river in Europe with her husband.
All right.
Hitting Christmas markets across Europe. So I'm glad to have you with me this week, Steph. Always great to chat with you.
Always fun. Glad to be back.
All right. So what have you been driving?
I had a Nissan Leaf SV Plus this week. A little chilly, a couple of days in Michigan, so got to look at the cold weather, and I didn't think it had a super significant impact. And what was better is it told you what I had, so whatever impact was there was registered in the readout. So and I think that's kind of important. A big thing about EVs, especially in the cold, is how accurate your range readings are. And if you lose a little bit of range for cold, at least it says it. Yeah. And it's not super optimistic about it. But overall, I mean, this one was 38,000. My cat's sitting on my paperwork.
Yeah, I see the corner of her face, just one eye in the corner of the Zoom window here as I'm looking at you.
She's a funny cat, but at any rate, it was about $38,000, which is a fair amount of change for a 5-door hatchback.
And that's the longer range 220 mile version, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yes. So the range was, I mean, for what I'm doing, that range was perfectly fine. We've talked about EV range, before, and certainly there is an interest in having something that's 250 miles plus or 300 miles plus. But at least for my daily needs, that range was fine. I wasn't planning on taking it on a long road trip, so I didn't really have to worry about any of that. And on a normal work week, it was fine. So yeah, that longer range worked. But it's not the most fun to drive, unfortunately.
That's always been one of the challenges with the Leaf.
And at this point in time, its infotainment system is just not as good as anyone else's right now. And at 38,000, I think that hurts the car quite a bit. The range is fine. The handling is just okay. The tires are clearly energy optimized tires, and so it feels in the handling, it feels sort of squishy sometimes. So it's not my favorite EV, unfortunately. But they're due to work on that relatively soon. And I think we've talked before about Nissan kind of having lost a little bit of a first mover lead in that space, and working to sort of recover it.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago on the show, we talked about, there was an article that came out of Europe in Autocar about some plans that Nissan had announced for their UK assembly plant in Sunderland for some of the future vehicles they're going to build there, which are, I guess, going to be all electric, including an electric Juke and a new Leaf, new generation Leaf. Right. So there should be a new. I mean, this Leaf, while it's technically second generation, is it was a reskin of the first generation Leaf. It's still basically the same technology they've had since 2010, except for expanding the battery capacity.
Right.
So it is a little aged.
Yeah, and as they launched this car, they took an interesting tack that proved to not necessarily be the best one. Remember, it launched with the 150-mile range first, and it launched and that was very conscious to get the price point down.
Right, because they wanted to have a $30,000 starting price for it.
Right, and make sure that you had, in order to get the lower price point, you needed the lower range, and the idea was people will understand, and in a year or two, 18 months or whatever it was, we'll have the longer range vehicle, and then they'll be ready for it. And it just wasn't the right note for the market at that particular moment in the U.S. It just wasn't really what they wanted to hear. And it slowed that first year. And then when the second longer range came out, being in that 212, 220 space was better. But by then the conversation shifted to 250 and 300 and it got left in the dust, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it doesn't help that the Leaf, is still saddled with a CHAdeMO fast charging connector, which, quote unquote fast charging, which is limited to 50 kilowatts. So compared to a lot of newer EVs, even the fast charging is pretty slow.
Yeah. But Aria, they've got Aria, and there's more coming. It's interesting seeing Nissan be one of the early players, and now spoke with them and Japan at the Tokyo Motor Show too, and their approach is to be ready when EVs are really taking off and when people are really ready, because as we've talked about, 23 and 24 are still baby step years, and they're kind of waiting to figure out what that right point is to be there, which is just, it's not necessarily the wrong strategy, because right now there's not enough demand. There's demand for EVs, but not enough demand to really switch faster than we are, and you don't want to get ahead of it. You don't want to then be GM and Ford and having to pull things back a little bit and slow down. So it's an interesting balancing act, and it's interesting watching a company that started out and valuing that first position, that first mover position, decide that, okay, we're going to instead step back a little bit and wait for the market to develop a little bit before we jump back into it. And of course, they're developing the products that they'll need for that, because you can't not develop the products. But they've taken a little bit of a different approach. And when you're a massive company managing capital allocation, it's not necessarily the wrong approach.
Yeah,
there's a lot of things they pull in.
Yeah, and we've talked. I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations as well with reporters over the last couple of months about slowing EV sales.
Yeah,
which is, in fact, not really the case if you actually look at the numbers. If you plot them out, it's EV sales have continued to grow. Last month, we topped 1 million EV sales in the U.S. for the first time ever. What we're seeing is some slowing of the growth. We're not into the hockey stick moment yet. We're not into compound growth, but I've got a plot of EV sales over the last 3 years, monthly sales, and it's basically a straight line going up and to the right. Yeah. So it's not curving up yet. We're not into that exponential growth yet. And so, for what you said about, Nissan kind of holding back, kind of trying to wait for that hockey stick moment, it may not be the worst choice in the world in terms of, how you're going to invest your resources. And, we know they've got a lot of stuff, a lot of new EVs coming. And there's some very interesting stuff coming. So the next few years are going to be fascinating to watch in this industry.
They are.
And one thing to keep in mind about the Leaf, at least the current generation Leaf, is it is built in Tennessee, and the batteries are built in Tennessee, which means it's still eligible for a full $7,500 tax credit. So even that $38,000 is is not cheap, but you can get that down closer to $30,000.
Yeah, not to be picky, but it's $3,750. It's not the full $7,500.
Okay, well, yeah, I just looked at
battery components.
Is that right now?
It's assembled, but I don't think. Yeah, that's right now.
Let's see,
October. Oh, the 2024 Leaf. So let me see what the 2023.
Let's see.
You're
right. It did drop to $3,750. Yes. Yeah. So still looking at almost $4,000 off of it.
Yes.
Which is not insignificant. But it's not clear if the next generation Leaf is also going to be produced in North America. Nissan hasn't said anything yet. And I think there's a good chance that it probably won't be. But
that's my expectation, because where they're running sideways with the tax credit, I believe, is in the materials for the battery.
Yeah.
I mean, the battery's assembled here, but the materials.
Yeah, most of the
imported,
the raw materials are coming in from outside.
Yeah, and we haven't heard a lot about Nissan's investment yet changing for that.
Yeah.
It's not one of the companies that's announced a new battery materials plant or anything here. So not that they won't for sure, but it might not. It might not.
Yeah.
And I didn't. While we're on the subject,
and the Aria is brought in from Japan, so it's not.
So it's not gonna. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, that tax credit is certainly part of the equation. But even at 35, or you take the $3,750 off that $3,800, you're still expensive for a 5-door hatchback.
Yeah. But
you're still expensive for a small car.
But if you can get by with the 150-mile range version, I mean, the 2024 Leaf S starts at $28,000. So with the tax credit, you're down, but around $25,000, with delivery, which is, it's not terrible. And for a lot of people, 150 miles is plenty. Especially if you live in a warm weather climate and you're not dealing with winter.
I could have done 150 miles range, and for a lot of my daily uses and stuff like that. So, yeah, what's interesting too about that, your point with the 150-mile range, is it brings up an issue with affordability in EVs that I keep thinking about, and the general conversation and tone is we need, quote unquote, more affordable EVs, and we need them and the fact is we do have a plethora of EVs, or a number of EVs that are available either at the average vehicle price, which is pretty high right now at $49,000. That's still pretty high. Or we have ones that are available at $35,000 and $30,000, especially when you put in the tax credit, but they're expensive for their segment. And so I think that's really what we're looking for when we use the term affordable electric vehicle. I think what the real issue is it affordable for its segment? And that's where things like Chevrolet Equinox EV is going to command at a decent price, but it's still going to be a few $1,000s more than an Equinox, a regular Equinox. And then you've got the Trax sitting there too. And it'll be notably more expensive than the Trax. So it's not so much the raw price of the Equinox EV being, where's that? And is that low enough? It's inconsistent with its segment. And that's a nuance that doesn't always really get talked about, but my instinct is that's what consumers are feeling.
Right.
If you've decided to spend $45,000 on a car, you can find an EV if that's what you want.
Yeah.
And you can find a good EV. It's not like you have to buy a piece of junk either, right? You can find a good EV for $45,000, but it won't be a 3-row. It won't be certain things, and it will be more expensive than other vehicles in its class. And I think that's.
But of course, that's also why the sales of the Chevy Bolt finally took off in the last year and a half, when they lowered the price to starting price to $26,000, and with the $7,500 tax credit, you can get it under $20,000, and in some states you can get it down to like $17,000 with state incentives as well. So, but unfortunately,
and it's a terrific little car. Yes,
production ended this week. So.
More Bolts.
And
get one. Go find one.
If you can find one on the lot somewhere,
buy it.
Yeah.
That one with that's the counterpart to the Leaf, and the Bolt. the Bolt's in a better space right now, and in terms of its battery technology, in terms of its infotainment, in terms of its drivability, you know, you know, you don't want to knock Nissan for being, you know, first and early and all that, but right now, you know, one for one, the Bolt's a better car than the Leaf, but they're both going away. So
yeah. Oh well. On the other hand, there's stuff that's not going away yet. Stuff that's brand new.
Did you drive Blazer too?
I did,
week?
and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
But the Chevy Colorado and the GMC Canyon, its GMC counterpart, were all new this year, as were most of the other midsize pickups, except for the Frontier, which came out last year. So I had the Colorado Trail Boss, which is kind of a mid-level version. It is kind of the entry-level off-roady version of the Colorado this year. So the Colorado, you know, the two-wheel drive Colorado work truck starts at $31,000, or just under, you know, $30,700. And the Trail Boss is a little bit more than that. It starts at $38,500. The one that I had was $41,055. Which, you know, when you compare it to a lot of off-road capable vehicles right now, is sadly not that much. You know, it's actually pretty reasonable. But, you know, this is by far not the most off-road capable version of the Colorado even. You know, so the Trail Boss is fairly minimally equipped as Colorados go. You can get much pricier versions of the Colorado. And that's a challenge for a lot of people. You know, so the Trail Boss is only, you can get most of the other trim levels of the Colorado with two-wheel drive. The Trail Boss is four-wheel drive only.
Okay, so you've got another $2,000.
Yep. And the all Colorados this year use variants of the 2.7 liter 4-cylinder turbo that launched in the Silverado in 2020 or 2021, whenever the current generation Silverado came out. Starting with there's a base 237 horsepower version. There's a mid-level trim with about 250 odd horsepower. And then there's the high output, which is 310 horsepower. And that's what comes in the Trail Boss. And they all have an 8-speed automatic transmission. And the Trail Boss has got four-wheel drive low and high, you know, so 2-speed transfer case. It's got a 2-inch factory lift, which helps, you know, for that off-road stuff. It doesn't have much in the way of skid plates, and no rock rails and things like that. You can get stuff like that for it, but they don't come standard on the Trail Boss. You know, what I noticed previously when I drove the Canyon and now the Trail Boss, the driving dynamics on the road are way better with this new generation. You know, it rides and handles actually surprisingly well. It doesn't bounce around. Even the Trail Boss and the Canyon AT4 that I drove before, that it don't bounce around on the road. There's good body control. It doesn't sway around when you're going around corners, which is
even
really
lifted.
Nice. Yeah, even lifted, and, you know, on all-terrain tires, it does quite well. It's actually quite reasonably pleasant to drive on the road, which is, to be realistic, is the way most people that buy these things are going to use them. I think the biggest issue I had with this thing was climbing into it, looking at that $41,000 price tag and looking around the cabin and how cheap it feels. You know, it's all hard plastics. The trim and the finish in this thing is about comparable to the $20,000 Ford Maverick that my next door neighbors have. You know, you know, on a $20,000 Maverick, I don't have a problem with that. That's fine. You know, I expect that on a Maverick. I'm not so crazy about it on a $40,000 truck. The Canyon AT4 I had, was clearly a significantly higher trim level. It had soft touch surfaces in there. It was finished much better. It was also much more expensive, but it was finished much nicer than this one was. And I don't know, for myself, I just have a hard time. I would have a really hard time justifying to myself spending $40,000 on something that feels so cheap inside. But aside from that, the rest of it was quite good. I didn't have any major issues. Well, I have one major issue with it. I did like the nitro yellow metallic paint on this. I think it's a cool color, and I'm a big advocate of having more bold colors on vehicles. Having fewer grays and silvers and blacks and whites. And this nitro yellow metallic, has a slightly green tinge to it, but it's a bold yellow. It's not that it's kind of like the yellow that they have in the Rivians, but maybe a little bit brighter than that. But I think it's a great color. In the interior, aside from the cheap feeling plastics, it does have a nice big 11-inch center touch screen and a digital instrument cluster. And it's a similar kind of look to a lot of the other recent Chevy introductions on the EV side. So it's kind of a stand-up center touch screen. It's got an Android Automotive infotainment system. Because it's not electric, it still has smartphone projection, so you can plug in your iPhone or your Android phone and use CarPlay or Android Auto, and you've got those interfaces.
Which one did you use more? Did you stick with the OEM?
As an Android user, by default, I just logged in. I opened up the Google Play Store, logged into my Google account, downloaded Pocket Casts and YouTube Music, and I just used that. And I had no issues at all using the stock system because it's running Google Maps anyway. So it's running the same apps I would be running from Android Auto anyway. I did plug in an iPhone, to try it out, and it works fine. If you're an iPhone user and you like CarPlay, it works, just as you would expect it in any other vehicle. The only major functional complaint I had about the Trail Boss was fuel economy. It was kind of mediocre. It's rated at 17 city, 21 highway, 19 combined. I got about 17 overall in mixed driving, which is not great. And that's probably the biggest issue I have with these mid-size trucks. I think the size is a lot more reasonable than full-size trucks, and it's much more appropriate for most people compared to a full-size truck. But the fuel economy of these usually isn't any better than the full-size truck.
Full size.
So, it's kind of hard to make the case, why should I settle for a smaller truck when I'm not going to be saving any money on gas? Now, you are going to be paying more for that full-size truck. But, it's, I kind of wish we would see automakers, at least, Toyota's putting a hybrid system in the new Tacoma that's in the spring. But, if that one is like the hybrid that's in the Tundra, it's actually not going to help very much. It's going to be more for performance and fuel economy. I wish, manufacturers would put some more hybrid options in some of these mid-size trucks to get some better fuel efficiency.
Rather than performance,
Right. There is.
That's the skew.
Yeah, there is a plug-in hybrid version, a plug-in hybrid coming to the Gladiator at some point in the next couple of years. We found that out from the UAW contract. So they're putting the 4xe system in there. So that'll help at least the Gladiator. And presumably, if they do a Ram midsize, hopefully they might put that in there as well. But, that aside from that, I think that the size is good. It's quite reasonable. Back seats, a little on the tight side. No more extended cab version for this generation. It's just the crew cab. But
I think that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is the vast majority of people buy the crew cab anyway, because the extended cab, they had jump seats in there, they were basically, I mean, you couldn't even put a child seat in there.
Right.
And
and Tacoma's extended cab doesn't have seats in the back.
Yeah,
right now.
yeah, it's just for extra storage,
okay, fine.
which is kind of the way it used to
storage.
be in the old days.
Yep.
So I think that's fine. So, aside from the price and the mediocre fuel economy and the cheap feeling interior, it's actually a pretty good truck.
So I have a question and just sort of a thought on the interior, and I don't disagree that when you've got hard plastics at $40,000, it gives you pause. But you've got the Colorado. There's not that that's what you're driving, but there is a ZR2, or there's a upper level that gives you
there's
more
the ZR2 Bison, I think.
Bison, which if I remember right, has a little bit better interior materials as well, which would be more similar to the AT4X, but it's a little bit more money. If you're a buyer and you've settled on the Trail Boss as being the one that you want, how much of your thought process is recognizing that you're getting the extra lift, you're getting the four-wheel drive stuff that you want, and that's where your 40,000 is going, and it's not going to materials. And if you value the materials and the performance, you do have the more expensive ZR2 Bison to go to. I don't know that makes the plastic okay, but I don't know if that's part of what fits into a consumer as they're going through it.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that interior doesn't feel as good as the other one does, but I really want that 2 inches, because that's what I want my truck to be.
The thing is,
they do know that that costs money. I mean, they know from doing it to their trucks themselves aftermarket. They know that this componentry costs money.
Yeah,
and I think that's part of it.
I think you're right. I guess the issue is it's got the 2-inch lift, but it doesn't have like a full set of skid plates in there.
Yeah, that's the downside.
I guess maybe the way to look at the Trail Boss is for somebody that wants to do some off-roading but wants something that they can customize themselves in the aftermarket. The ZR2 starts at $48,000. It has significantly more off-road capability from the factory. Better tires, better tires, skid plates, better dampers, things like that. For somebody that wants a more basic truck that has the lift kit from the factory, and then is going to go and buy stuff from AEV or some other aftermarket company and start installing what they the specific setup that they want. Then the Trail Boss is more for them. So it's kind of a starting point for building it's not necessarily a serious off-roader in and of its own, but it's the starting point for building one.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. And as we just talk about these trim levels and what Chevrolet knows what their truck buyers are going to do. They know that they've got a buyer sitting out there that doesn't want to go through the hassle of picking their own parts. And the ZR2 Bison check that box. And there are people who they do want to do that stuff themselves. They want to choose it. They want it to be a little bit different, whether they're actually wrenching it themselves or they're having it put on. They want that to be their own decision process. And they may spend, at the end of the day, it's just as much money as they would have spent on the ZR2 Bison, but it's theirs.
Yeah.
And then you've still got, your more sort of comfort oriented kind of versions and that are less off-road. So Chevrolet knows how to slice that up and be able to address what each of those consumers wants in a way. So far, certainly there's more complexity than if they didn't have as many trim levels, but using the components in a really smart way. So that Chevrolet captures as much margin as they can, and the consumer has the version that works for them. And pickup trucks do have more trim levels and more choices and more options than SUVs and sedans do. For these reasons, there's just more aftermarket work done on pickup trucks. So I think that you're right about the plastics being kind of meh. But
to your point though,
level, it works for
if somebody wants one that they're going to customize into a serious off-roader, maybe having the non-fancy materials is the right choice for them, because, they know it's going to get dirty. They're going to go out and run in the desert or somewhere, it's going to get all dirty. They want to be able to just wipe it down, and not have to worry about getting the fancy materials all messed up.
Yeah.
So
there are people that look at fancy materials and go, "Why? I don't need that."
Exactly.
Not me. I want the fancy materials. Thank you very much.
But you and I aren't hardcore off-roaders either. So
no, I'm not. But yeah, so it's overall it's a neat thing. It's a neat truck, I think. And I do think it shows that reflects again that Chevrolet does understand their buyers.
Yeah.
And what these people are doing, and dropping the extended cab, I think works really well for them.
Because I drove the last generation Colorado with the extended cab, and it's like, I folded the seat forward and looked, and having those jump seats in there was just a complete waste of money and space. I'd rather just have it empty.
Yeah, and work truck guys they'll do the crew cab if that's what's there. So I think at that price to where they want it to. So I think that works out pretty well. But
yeah. Smartphones have gotten way more expensive over the past decade, and all it takes is one impact on a hard floor to make you wish you had spent a few bucks to put a case on it. Going online without ExpressVPN is like not having a case for your phone, and it only costs a few dollars a month. Nicole, Robbie, and I travel a lot for our work, and we spend a lot of time in hotels, coffee shops, airplanes, and of course the Delta Sky Club. Connecting to the Wi-Fi in any public places with shared Wi-Fi puts your data at risk because bad actors could be intercepting what you send and using it to steal from you. It only takes some cheap hardware to intercept Wi-Fi data, and even a smart preteen can do it. Hackers can make up to $1,000 per victim selling personal information on the dark web. ExpressVPN stops the bad guys by creating a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet. ExpressVPN uses state-of-the-art encryption that would take a supercomputer up to 1 billion years to crack. I have ExpressVPN on all my devices, including a MacBook Pro, Windows laptops and desktops, and Android and iOS phones and laptops, or tablets. When I want to be secure, I just launch the app, click once to connect, and my data is secure. As I said, I travel a lot for my work, and I have to connect to countless public Wi-Fi networks in many countries. I have ExpressVPN on all my connected devices so that whoever else is on the same network can't see any of my data. That's important because I often have to check banks, credit card accounts, and transmit client data that might be sensitive, as well as filing articles on news that might be under embargo. ExpressVPN protects all of it, and I've been paying for my own account for years. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/wheelbearings. That's expressvpn.com/wheelbearings, and you can get an extra 4 months for free. expressvpn.com/wheelbearings.
Everyone's talking about AI these days, right? This season on Compiler, we're diving deep into how AI is reshaping the world we live in. Join us for a new season of Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
One of the hardest parts of getting older is feeling like something's off in your body, but not knowing exactly what. It's not just aging, it's often your hormones too. When they fall out of balance, everything feels off. But here's the good news. This doesn't have to be the story of your next chapter. Hormone Harmony by Happy Mammoth is an herbal formula made with science-backed ingredients designed to fine-tune your hormones by balancing estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and even stress hormones like cortisol. It helps with common issues such as hot flashes, poor sleep, low energy, bloating, and more. With over 40,000 reviews and a bottle sold every 24 seconds, the results speak for themselves. A survey found 86% of women lost weight, 77% saw an improved mood, and 100% felt like themselves again. Start your next chapter feeling balanced and in control. For a limited time, get 15% off your entire first order at happymammoth.com with code NEXTCHAPTER at checkout. Visit happymammoth.com today and get your old self back naturally.
Did you know you can support Wheel Bearings directly? Head to patreon.com/wheelbearingsmedia and you can become a patron today. Your contributions will help fund the platforms and tools we use to bring the podcast to you. And exclusives and improvements are already on the way thanks to your generosity. So if you want to be part of an automotive podcast like no other, head to patreon.com/wheelbearingsmedia. We've updated the Wheel Bearings merch store, and now there's a whole bunch of new choices, new colors, new styles, T-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, hats, mugs, travel mugs, stickers, aprons, tote bags, you name it. You can get your Wheel Bearings merch at shop.wheelbearings.media. Go check it out. That's shop.wheelbearings.media. Well, before we get to the Blazer, when I went out to LA, when I went out to California to drive the Blazer, I had something else I had to do the day before. And so I borrowed a Kia EV9. Nice. Flew into LAX, borrowed a Kia EV9 to drive to Pomona and then down to Del Mar. And this was the GT line. And so over the course of a couple of days, I put probably about 150 miles on it. Okay. And the EV9 is the 3-row crossover based on the Hyundai Motor Group eGMP platform. And right now it is the most affordable 3-row electric crossover in the market. And in terms of a true 3-row.
Right. Drum roll, please. That price is
middle of 24. It'll have competition from the new Hyundai Ioniq 7. But the one that I had, was the GT line all-wheel drive, which starts, the light rear-wheel drive, the base model, starts at $55,000, which is not cheap. Okay. But it's, when you compare it to, a high-end Telluride or Explorer or anything like that, it's not crazy expensive either. It's a few $1,000s more. The GT line, the loaded version that I had, $73,900, which is, now you're encroaching on Rivian territory there, without as much performance as a Rivian. But it does have, I would say, more room in the third row compared to the Rivian R1S, and you can also get the light, which is the entry trim level, with the long range rear wheel drive for $59,000, and the wind all wheel drive for $64,000. And that wind all wheel drive, if you need all wheel drive, that wind all wheel drive is kind of the sweet spot, which is typical. Usually you don't want the top end, you don't want the bottom end, you want something in the middle. And so that's not a bad choice. Right now, these are still sourced from Korea. Middle of 2024, they're adding production of the EV9 at Kia's assembly plant in West Point, Georgia. West Point, yep. So at that point, it'll start to be eligible for tax credits. So that'll help bring the price down. But aside from the price, I really do like the EV9 as a 3-row crossover. It's obviously not as efficient as the smaller ones like the EV6 and the Ioniq 5, because it's bigger. It's got it's heavier. It's got larger frontal area, more aerodynamic drag. But it actually did quite a bit better in terms of efficiency than the EPA numbers would suggest. Okay. So the base rear wheel drive standard range model is rated at 230 miles of range. That's the $55,000 one. The long range rear wheel drive, 304 miles is what it's rated at. And the GT line, which has bigger wheels and tires, is rated at 270. I drove the EV9 about 160 miles. And the rating, the EPA rating on that GT line is 42 kilowatt hours per 100 miles, which is about 2.4 miles per kilowatt hour, which doesn't sound great. But what I actually averaged over the couple of days I drove it, about 150, 160 miles, was 3.1 miles per kilowatt hour.
Oh, nice.
Which is actually really good for a vehicle that size.
That size.
When I drove the R1S, it averaged closer to about 2.1 miles per kilowatt hour. And it's a similarly sized vehicle. So, this is actually quite an efficient vehicle. So, even if you had the GT line, I think you would have no trouble at all getting over 300 miles of range out of it. And, when most of the driving I did was on the highway at, 60 to 75 miles an hour. The first 50 miles or so from LAX to Pomona in LA traffic, was averaging more like about 30 miles an hour on the freeway. But once I was driving south, it was much faster, and it still doing 3.1 miles per kilowatt hour. So really, really impressive vehicle. And it's very roomy, very nice inside, nice materials, nice fit and finish. I think if you are looking, if you want a 3-row crossover, and you're looking for something electric, there's obviously not a lot of choices right now, but this is definitely one worth taking a look at if you're in the market for a 3-row crossover. So,
I am driving that in January, so a little bit behind on you on that, but I'll pick up on that in January.
Yeah, so it's definitely worth a look. It doesn't have a huge frunk, unfortunately. It's kind of there's a small storage compartment under the front, but it's got a good amount of space in the back, and you can fold down obviously the second and third row seats and make it much larger in the back if you need to carry larger stuff. So it's definitely worth consideration if you're in the market for something like that. And over the next year and a half, 2 years, we'll have significantly more choices in that segment as well. The Hyundai Ioniq 7, Ford's coming out with something end of next year, early 2025, that is what they call an Explorer class EV.
Right.
We'll see how that one is. And there's definitely going to be other choices available.
They're coming. I mean, that's what we're talking about with the pace of EV growth and things of that nature being more 25 and 26, I think, is where we're going to start to see more activity, really. Because even if we've got 60 or 70 EVs right now, there's still 340 other kinds of cars out there. And it sounds like a lot when you say you've got 70 EVs to choose from, or 60 right now. But it's still a small. But
a lot of them are still in premium segments. Yeah. So if you're looking for something a little more affordable, mainstream, the choices are a lot slimmer.
Yeah, they are. So, but that's good. I'm looking forward to driving that one.
All right, so let's talk about
a couple more weeks.
Let's talk about something that is, at least by brand, nominally should be something more mainstream that you and I both had a chance to drive.
Yep.
Which is the Chevy Blazer EV. What did you think?
Yeah, to me, I liked it. There's a lot that I liked about driving it. I thought it felt good. I thought it felt planted. I thought it felt really stable. I do like the way that it looks. One of the things that I keep thinking about is they didn't have a regular ICE Blazer there to compare it to, and they kind of don't want to. Is when we live in Detroit, right? So we've seen these things knocking around a little bit here and there, and every time I see one on the road here, it's that kind of double take. Wait, which one is it? What is it? It's a Blazer, but it doesn't look quite like a Blazer, and there's not enough of them around to go, oh yeah, it's EV already. So it's a very comfortable and familiar design. It looks good, but it's very comfortable and familiar compared with something like a Hyundai Ioniq 5 or a Kia EV6 that are not. And we've talked about those before. I think a lot of people are really attracted to the futuristic styling of those. Some people aren't, but Chevrolet has gone a different route with that, and it's probably the right route for that brand. If the issue for getting into this hockey stick that we kind of want to see, part of that is familiarity and comfort, and bringing people in that it takes some of the hesitation out by keeping it into a shape that you're comfortable with, and it's a beautiful shape. It is a good looking car. So I think that's going to be interesting as we watch the Blazer and the Equinox come into the market and where that plays. There should ultimately be enough vehicles that you can have a futuristic styled and a comfortably styled, and everything plays together. It's all good. But and even like I digress just for a slight second to the photos of the Cadillac Vistiq that were released this week as well. That looks like an EV, but very much feels XT6 as well. So you do have that familiarity with the Cadillac vehicle that you've already got out there. So I thought that was interesting about it as well, that the design is really quite like the regular Blazer. And at the dinner, I was speaking with one of the designers, and he was explaining how they wanted to bring the sporty performance elements into the design of the interior with the vents. And I'm like, so this is the same story that we had when you launched the ICE Blazer a few years ago. So we're just kind of keeping
pulling in a lot of the Camaro design elements into the
interior. And he's like, yes, exactly. And I'm like, okay, it's been a few years. But that does a few things, that does keep it familiar. That does keep a theme going within the GM family. And with the Chevrolet brand. So I think it'll work well for Chevrolet to be comfortable and familiar. But I liked the way that it drove, used their embedded system. And I thought it was really fast. The Android operating system was really, really quick in the way that it executed, and sitting in the display vehicle as well, and rerouting and showing the different route plannings. It just was fast, really fast.
It was the opposite of what we experienced last year with the Cadillac Lyriq launch.
Yeah,
which was slow and buggy, and this time they fixed the problems.
They fixed the problems in that, and it was really, really quick. And I like that 17.7-inch screen, that the navigation map goes really to the edges of the screen, and so you're really using all of that screen real estate, which has not been true of all of the. So many times you get these larger screens and they just still don't use the full real estate there. So I liked the interior. I liked the way that system worked. Yes, there's pushback about not being able to hook up your phone, but I'm less concerned about that particular issue. I think that it'll be something that people talk about for a while, but if you go ahead and make that choice, I think you adapt to it pretty quickly. You still can hook up your iPhone and do text messages and do phone calls, and you still can stream your music off your iPhone. So it's not that you can't
and it shows you your playlists and everything on the screen.
Yep.
So
yeah.
The only thing really you're losing is kind of the CarPlay look and feel, but not the functionality.
Right. You lose Waze, I think. I don't think that the GM system has Waze in it, but
that's true. Waze is not available in the Play Store. Yeah.
Right. So, but you've got Google Maps, and that comes down to kind of a choice thing. But what you also gain is, in using their system and Google Maps, you're going to get better routing. And over time, they're going to introduce more things that do that. I mean, an example of that, of introducing more things to the system, is the Tahoe and Suburban coming out will have a routing based on towing, because you've already got that the systems in that vehicle for saving your trailer profiles and whatnot. That's been part of GM's trucks for a few years. Putting that data into and making it available to the embedded Google system, they're able to route you, understanding what your trailer is, and make sure that you're not routing you under a bridge that's too low, or the type of road that's just not going to be conducive for that. So there's things that are going to come together that give you a better experience, because that system understands what's going on with your vehicle. With battery electric vehicles, it can be preconditioning along the route when they know you've programmed a charging point in there and things like that. So I think that ultimately people will kind of get used to it. They'll, breaking the cord of using. If you're dedicated to Apple Maps, you're probably not going to be happy. But I don't know. I'm in the Google Maps camp, so I'm fine.
Well, and I think the big thing you get with the built-in Google Maps is the routing, the charge routing, where they're integrating. They've got the terrain information. They're pulling in weather information. They've got where you're going. They've got the information about where the chargers are, and they're doing this sort of functionality that you have if you've ever used a better route planner, which is figuring out based on what your destination is, what your current state of charge is, and what traffic and everything else, all the other variables, where are the best places for you to stop so that you can get to your destination. And they'll even suggest, how long you should sit there, how long you should charge at a particular charger.
Right.
before you go on, so you're not wasting a lot of time. So that's one of the key things that they're trying to do with this, with forcing everybody into the Google Maps, using the built-in Google Maps system.
The downside will be, as they launch this now, they've said that for the first 8 years or so, which gives you 2 owners,
Yeah,
basically, it's included with at no charge. And so after that, maybe they start charging in 5 years, maybe they start charging in 3 or 4. That's going to be the downside. Is that ultimately it's going to be something you're going to have to pay for.
yeah. At some point down the road, a customer will have to pay for a connectivity subscription that's bundled right now.
That'll be part of it. And how much that is and how much people object to it, kind of wait and see. People talk about subscriptions being too much, but then they keep using them. So it's one of those things we love to complain about. There may be some people that just say, I'm not going to consider it because I can't plug CarPlay into it, but they're probably doing themselves a disservice because it's a good system. And it's a change, but
even if you're an iPhone user, if you were considering one of these, you should definitely go and take a look at one at a dealer, play with it, spend a half hour or an hour with it and see what it's like before you make a final decision. Don't just automatically discount it. I mean, you may decide, no, I absolutely want CarPlay, and that's fine. There's a lot of other choices for you, for now at least. But we'll see. Jim Farley insists that, nope, we're keeping it, but 2 years from now, we'll see. It's definitely check it out for yourself and see how you feel about the experience.
Yep, I would agree. And I'm, and as far as why an automaker might pull back on, that statement, or Honda and Acura might decide ultimately that they don't want to, it is an extra cost for the automaker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so, if you plug in your CarPlay, you feel like it's free, but it's not free. There's some money changing hands there somewhere down the road, and it costs for them to make sure that their over-the-air updates continue to support new versions of CarPlay, new versions of iPhones. So there is a cost embedded into that system, and we are in a point where you're always at a point where every penny counts. You've been on vehicle programs before. It's always been, but it's even more intense at this point with EVs not yet profitable. And whatever that cost is, you can have engineers and designers and program planners arguing about 50 cents.
Yeah.
Where you save a cost.
Oh, trust me, I've been in those conversations as an engineer.
Absolutely. And so if I don't know what the number is for CarPlay, but if it's $100 a car, you can pull it out and give the consumer a good experience. That's the flip side. And GM does have to, my impression
it's up to GM to prove
so far.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. But if they can do that, that's a $50 or $100 that matters.
Yeah. And it's my understanding that they don't have to pay Apple and Google for CarPlay, to use CarPlay, but there is the cost of doing the integration. Software development is not free, and so doing the integration and providing the support and doing the updates, that is a very non-trivial cost. And so if you can, and it's also the more components you add to a software stack, the more places there are for things to go wrong and for bugs to happen and things to crash. And, if you can take things out that you think are not necessary, then, you can make the system more reliable.
Right.
So hopefully that will be the case.
Hopefully that will be the case. And then when you look at it, I mean, you're Android and I'm iPhone, but I find that a lot of vehicles that I'm in, the iPhone connectivity is not always great, but BMWs don't seem to be able to maintain a wireless connection. It just sort of drops in the middle and then maybe comes back. Yeah. I've had a number of vehicles where I tend to plug in a lot too, that if you aren't thinking and you get in the car and you plug it in and then you hit the start button, it's never going to connect. So you have to time it just right to make sure it works. So it's interesting hearing pushback and hearing comments and seeing whether it's Facebook or social media, and people say, well, I wouldn't consider this because it doesn't offer CarPlay. Like, your CarPlay experience isn't perfect, man.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to connect an external device to drive the interface in your car, that's a big opportunity for things to go wrong. In my wife's Honda Civic, her Android Auto drops out all the time. It loses connection to the phone, and it's a wired connection. It's not even, it doesn't even have wireless. It's wired. And I've had it happen in other vehicles as well. So, again, that's an opportunity for errors that are frustrating and degrade the customer experience.
Absolutely. So now we've handled the infotainment side of the Blazer question. And it's an important one. It's one that's going to be talked about for a while, but I think that it'll settle down as it gets in owners' hands and owners start using it, and owners start saying, oh, I'm happy with this. Some probably won't, but the ones, my experience with that, it was good. So I don't know. I feel like it would work.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
Have you ever killed a houseplant before? Don't worry, you are not alone. But what if I told you you're not destined to be a plant killer? What if I told you you could not only fill your home with gorgeous, luscious, happy, thriving plants, but live a happier life through caring for them? Hey, new plant friend, my name is Maria. I am a former plant killer turned happy plant lady and host of the Growing Joy with Plants podcast, where it is my life's mission to help you grow happy plants and thrive alongside them. Because when you learn to care for plants, you really learn to slow down, connect with nature, and nurture yourself too. Each week, I share expert tips, inspiring conversations, and soulful planty wisdom to help you grow a greener, happier life. So if you're ready to turn your plant struggles into plant joy and get the green thumb you've always dreamed of, search Growing Joy with Plants wherever you listen to podcasts and hit subscribe. That's Growing Joy with Plants podcast. Let's grow some joy together.
But I like the way that it drove. I like the way that it looks. I feel like it'll sit well in the Chevy lineup. Again, we're going to hit price. Because the one that we had was $60,000-ish, and that's a fair amount of money.
That's going to be a big issue, especially, and I think this is probably part of why they don't want us comparing it directly to the internal combustion Blazer. I've got the Chevy build and price open in front of me right now. A 2LT front wheel drive Blazer starts at $37,000.
Yeah.
The cheapest Blazer EV, the front wheel drive 2LT Blazer EV, they say is going to be under $50,000. Whenever they say under some number, it means
it's $49,995.
Yeah, exactly. At best, it might be $49,500. It's going to be basically $50,000. So you're looking at $14,000 premium to go from that. Now, granted, the EV is larger, and that was one of the issues I had with it. It is, I too very much like the design. I think it's a fairly bold design, but not crazy looking or futuristic. But it's wide. It is like
wide.
4 inches wider than a Mustang Mach-E or a Model Y. Asked, what's the competition for this vehicle? Chevy said, well, there isn't really a direct competitor to this in the market, which, if you're looking strictly based on size for a mid-size 2-row crossover, they're right. There isn't a mid-size 2-row electric crossover that is the same size as this, because this thing is like 7 inches longer than a Mach-E.
Yeah.
It's 4 inches wider, and 900 pounds heavier. I
felt the weight.
That's
part of the reason that it felt so stable.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've done some really interesting things from a powertrain perspective because it's electric. You have a lot of flexibility in where you put the motors. I mean, we saw this past year, Polestar went from having a dual motor with 2 identical motors plus a front wheel drive single motor version to making the single motor a rear wheel drive and then all wheel drive with 2 different size motors. And for the Blazer, this is the first time that anybody's offering a vehicle that you can have with front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, or all wheel drive. And so the ones we had to drive were the RS trim level, which is the mid trim level. And the first day we got to drive the rear wheel drive RS, which has the larger 340 horsepower motor. It's the same motor that's in the Cadillac Lyriq. It's essentially this is a Cadillac Lyriq with Chevy styling on it. It is mechanically identical, same battery, same motors, everything, same suspension. And then the all-wheel drive RS has a smaller front motor and a smaller rear motor. So it is more, it's more like it's more like a typical front-wheel drive based vehicle with all-wheel drive. So basically like the gas Blazer, where it'll divert, 10 to 20% of the torque to the rear axle when you need some extra traction. And they call that the E all-wheel drive. So you get the big motor in the front, and it handles, because it's a little more front weight biased, it handles more like a front-wheel drive car. And it understeers more. The rear drive was it was more powerful, but, because 288 for the all-wheel drive, 340 for the rear drive.
Big difference. Yeah.
And they feel distinctly different. The rear drive feels more lively, both because it's got more power, but also because the power is at the rear axle. So, you can, it's not quite, I wouldn't call it a drift machine, but, you can get it to turn a little more as you're going through corners. Whereas the all-wheel drive tends to understeer more, which I definitely felt in some early curves. But a lot of the roads that they had us driving on were fairly narrow, and this is a wide car. And you feel that width on those narrow, twisting mountain roads, which can be challenging.
That was definitely true in that space. I did like the rear drive a little bit better as well. But thinking about the all-wheel drive one too, other than the width, just thinking about a buyer who is really looking for, standard transportation for the most part, right? They if they're choosing Blazer, if they're going that way, they like the sportier styling, so they want a little bit, but it's not necessarily a performance driver that's getting into that. And thinking about that sort of just common everyday driving, it's as nice, if not nicer, than some of the ICE in that space. It's a little bit quieter. The extra width is tough on a road like that. But I have a feeling that if you're talking about a family, if you're talking about kids, if you're talking about that just sort of day-to-day living, they're going to find that extra width is comfortable. And a Model Y, to me, always looks kind of narrow and strange anyway.
Yeah,
so
it
looks
does.
a little bit better that way. The Model Y, the Mustang Mach-E, I don't think looks as narrow.
Its proportions are a little better than the Y. The Y looks a little tall.
Yeah, it looks awkward to me, but neither here nor there. So I think that hitting the mark of where a Blazer needs to be in terms of driving, in terms of that use case, I think it's right there. And I'm just thinking of different people that I've had in the car with me over time or whatever, and thinking about my big tall brother-in-law, and he's a big tall guy. He'll like that extra width. So I think that when you get into the passengers and when you get into driving it as a family, I think people will appreciate that until they go on the canyon road and have to avoid the bicyclist.
Yeah, well, there's that, and then there's also the price point, which, for reference, the 2024 Cadillac Lyriq rear-wheel drive, same 340 horsepower, starts at $58,590. An RS all-wheel drive, $61,790.
That's,
I have a real hard time justifying the extra $3,000 in the Blazer.
Yeah, that's going to be a struggle.
Yeah.
It's going to be a struggle.
And even the all-wheel drive LT is like 57.
Yeah.
57,000.
You've got to find a way to get that pricing off the Cadillac. You can't have your Blazer priced on top of your Lyriq.
Yeah.
That's going to be a difficult proposition. I mean, in truth, a Cadillac intender is probably not looking at a Chevrolet. So you're not, but in a normal circumstance, in a normal world. But when you're looking at electric vehicles, and if people are filtering electric first and brand second and then price, then you're going to get some overlap, and you're going to get some cross shopping that you wouldn't get on an ICE. You probably
the Cadillac buyer might not be looking at the Chevrolet, but do you think that Chevrolet buyer might be looking at the Blazer and say, I kind of like the look of that Cadillac over there, and then realize, well, I can get a Cadillac for the same price or less, for the same equipment.
Yeah. I think that's more likely to be the case, especially because you're filtering EV.
Yeah.
If you're Chevrolet Tahoe and Cadillac Escalade, you're really not gonna get that overlap as much. Well, the pricing doesn't overlap. So
right.
Even if you try to do that, but intention. So if you're in the ICE traditional structure, you're filtering out a little bit differently. But when you're in the EV structure, and if you're selected EV first, and that's where you are going to be putting these two up against each other. And yeah, the Cadillac brand intender might just think, I don't want to go to EV, but I think, all right, well, I want to go to Chevrolet, but the Chevrolet intender may, they're taking a little bit more time with those numbers. And they may look at that and go, I don't know, I could just step up to the Cadillac and get a little bit different interior. Blazer does have a bigger screen at the moment. No, that's not true. Cadillac has
they're pretty close because you get 33 inches across.
Yeah.
In the Cadillac, so it's.
Yeah, I still haven't driven a Lyriq since we drove it in Salt Lake.
Yeah, not very many people have.
Or whatever it was. So, and then when we get the ZDX and the Prologue in there, as well, this pricing is not going to be too. The Acura is a little bit more, but you're going to have some pricing issues, and it's going to be change brand dynamics a little bit, or has potential to, at that price point. We're waiting for prices to get a little bit more settled, and that's going to take more time.
And I wonder, Honda has, they haven't released detailed pricing for the Prologue yet, other than to say that, it'll start under $50,000. So it sounds like it's going to be priced about the same as the Blazer, because it's, it's the same size, got the same powertrains in it. So I wonder if that had anything to do with the decision by Honda and GM to split up on the low-cost EVs that they were doing, because maybe Honda figured, that they just can't get down to the price points they want, working with the Ultium architecture.
I'm not sure where that broke down, but somewhere in there, those conversations they just went sideways, and Honda, my understanding, Honda wasn't particularly happy, but I'm not a fly on the wall in that room, so I don't want to go too crazy in speculating as to why, if it was price or if it was something else or if it was timing but Honda also, was looking at 3 or 4 EV powertrain or EV platforms, and it felt like they didn't know what they wanted to do, and had kind of hooked up with the GM Prologue and ZDX to get it out quickly, and then looked at that and said, okay, well, we can kind of keep going and move a little bit more quickly, but it didn't feel like they knew exactly what they wanted. And I think one of the changes might have been just they've settled down a little bit and made their independent plan a little bit more. Whether they've shared that enough of that plan or not, we're going to hear more about that plan at CES.
Yeah, they're gonna show a concept of their next generation EVs.
Yeah, so I think that there's a little bit of that going on. And Honda not being 100% sure what they wanted to do, and taking a path forward that got them there faster, but maybe wasn't what they really wanted.
Yeah. But, despite all the complaints we've had about the Blazer, I agree with you. I thought it was really good to drive. I thought the driving dynamics were actually excellent. Even the steering feel, for an EV with electric power steering. I thought it actually had pretty surprisingly good steering feel. So it was quite fun to drive, especially the rear-wheel drive version.
Didn't love the sound, and talked to the chief engineer about that, and she's like, "Yeah, we know." Like, apparently that's been a feedback.
But that's something you can easily fix with an OTA update.
Well, she said she has to wait till the next model year to really do much about that. And there's two versions, there are two levels of the sound that I was noticing. There's the low speed noise that is mandated, and the mandate doesn't necessarily say what it has to sound like, but they are all kind of similar. And that low speed noise was bugging me sometimes because I'd be stopping at a stoplight. And so that noise starts because you're stopped in a stoplight, and then you start to go, and the noise doesn't go away until you're at that 25 miles an hour or whatever. I'm like, I'm driving, I'm moving, this is really annoying. I don't think I had the radio on at that point. So it's a very annoying noise. But even when you're on the road, I didn't love the sound. But even as I say that, I don't think we've settled on what that should be. So all I could say was I didn't like the sound very well, but I kind of feel bad saying that out loud because I can't tell you what it needs to be. I can't tell you what that tone should be.
Spend more time with it, you might be able to judge that a little better.
Yeah.
All right. Well, earlier you briefly referenced the Cadillac Vistiq, or however the hell they're pronounced.
I have no idea.
I think it's Vistiq. Because when they first showed us the Celestiq, they called it Celestiq, not Celestiq. And I think they're, apart from the Escalade IQ, they're going with
Lyriq Optic,
on the end. So the Vistiq, like the Optic that we saw a few weeks ago, they have revealed, the other two EVs that they promised us before the end of the year without actually telling us anything about them other than how they look and roughly what the size is. And the Vistiq is their 3-row utility. What did you think of it?
Similar to the Blazer, right? It looks very familiar. It looks from the side. You read XT6, and it's not gonna scare away. But the thing is, XT6 is pretty but kind of boring. So it's kind of boring. But the front, the lights, and the front and the rear, and the way that they've handled that, it does speak to the Cadillac EV sort of design theme. So the whole package looks
it's
nice.
consistent with Lyriq and Escalade and Optic and
so it's attractive in that way, but again, you're still looking in a very conservative approach, and kind of mirroring and mimicking what your gas vehicle's kind of overall shape is. Some of that is it's a 3-row.
Yeah,
you need the height in the 3-row in order to have the space then for your passengers and things like that. So there's the how far can you really go with that shape?
The Lyriq's kind of a fastback profile, whereas this is much more boxy and a little taller roof line. And the analog is the current XT5 and XT6, which are on the same architecture. I think maybe even the same wheelbase, or maybe the XT6 is slightly longer.
XT6 is longer.
Yeah. But it's got a boxier profile to it. And it's the same thing here. You looking at, they gave us 2 images and said it's a 2026 model year. And that's literally all they've told us. Nothing else. But looking at like the doors, it looks like it has the same push button door handles, that are, you push it. It looks like a door handle that should pop out from the door. But in fact, as on the Lyriq, I think it's just there, you press it and the door pops out the same way it does on the Mach-E.
I think so.
So,
it's, and the other, I think that it might see production. It will see production in China as well. And I think it might see production in China earlier than it does here. Same with Optic. By a few months, not by years, by a few months. So that's part of releasing the photos when is after the photos were released, and some of my colleagues were talking about it. At least one of them noted he'd seen it on the road. So that's been something that GM talked about a while ago. Is releasing those photos a little bit earlier enabled them to really be testing their vehicles without cladding, without anything in the way, because they've already shown what it looks like and they're not worried about hiding it. So it's been out and around in Detroit, and you do a double take and you go, I'm not quite sure what that is, but that's an XT6, but it's not.
Yeah, kind of a cross between an XT6 and a Lyric, Lyric front end,
Yeah.
XT6 back end, yeah.
But so that's it. And I think with General Motors, again, I still, it's a large company with needs high volume sales in general for most of the brands. And getting from ICE to EV is a lot too about in that midsection about getting people who aren't necessarily comfortable with that level of change, and how do you bring them in, and having a design and having things that look forward but are still familiar may just be the sweet spot for this company. It wouldn't be for Rivian, because Rivian doesn't have a past and it needs to break through and it needs to do something different. It wouldn't have been for Tesla. So when you look at different companies, Ford's going to need to find that a similar blend too, that their design is, and they did it pretty well with the Mustang Mach-E, that it looks different, but it's still something you can identify as a Ford, because we need to, in 25 and 26 and 27, get people who are not necessarily intenders to really think about it. In 24 and 23, we're still looking at people who are, like we talked about, who are going to go EV first. They've already made that decision. We then to flip that switch, you need to get people who are ICE first and are willing to consider it. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, at some point in 2024, we should be learning more about the Cadillac Vistiq, besides what it looks like. And there probably won't be any huge surprises there. But the one vehicle that has had an exceptionally long lifespan, it's the Ford Crown Victoria. It went out of production 11 years ago. In 2012 was the last ones that were built. And I actually just saw something recently. The last two Crown Vics that were in service in the New York taxi fleet are actually about to be retired. There's still two left in service in New York City, as running as yellow cabs. And this is on the same platform as the old Lincoln Town Car. And actually, two of my neighbors have town cars that they still drive. The platform for this thing is literally indestructible. One of the reasons why taxis and police forces love these things so much is they were cheap, they were fairly reliable, and they were really easy to fix and keep running. And apparently the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department was so enamored with the Crown Victoria that when Ford announced that they were going to retire them and replace them with something based on the Taurus and the Explorer, they bought and stockpiled a whole bunch of them, more than 600 of them. They put in a last minute order of 600 Crown Vics in 2011, and just parked them. And as older Crown Vics get retired, they put the new ones in.
Pull them in.
As of today, as of December 2023, they still have 429 of those running in the LA Sheriff's Department fleet. So the LA Sheriff's Department is probably one of the last police forces still using Crown Vics.
I feel like I saw one on the road the other day when I was driving around, and it's funny that you brought that up, because I was like, yeah, those still are kicking around here. We're in Detroit. We see them every now and again.
Oh yeah, I mean,
it wasn't in good condition for a police car. It was,
well, I mean,
the body was pretty tired. But.
Yeah, a lot of people, will buy them. When police retire them, you can often buy them at auction, dirt cheap, and just keep driving them indefinitely. And they do tend to look pretty rough. I mean, usually by the time they're done with police duty, they're often pretty worn out. But a lot of the yellow cabs we see are actually former police cars. Most of them were not bought new as cabs; they were bought new as police cars and then transformed into cabs. But they just keep going. And so, it's kind of like the old checker cabs that, kept running and running and running for years after Checker went out of business. I'll be curious to see how many current generation Dodge Chargers are still running a decade from now for police forces. Probably not that many.
Maybe they're a little bit less popular, but there's still a lot of Chargers around here.
Yeah,
and because it hasn't changed, I mean, there's been some design updates, but the overall shape of the vehicle hasn't changed a tremendous amount. There's a lot of them around here.
Oh yeah. Michigan State Police uses a lot of them. Various other local police forces use them, but even those are going out of production next week. In production. So, but actually, just this past week, yesterday, I guess, as we were recording this Friday, they ended production of the Camaro and the Bolt in Lansing and Orion, Michigan. So, a lot of stuff being retired this year.
Yeah, and they did keep to the schedule of retirement even with the strikes.
Yeah.
There was a bit of a wondering if they were going to have to, build out a little bit longer because they lost some strike time. But
well, yeah, I mean those two models,
those two plants were, two weren't affected.
Yeah, they never got struck. But yeah. Well, I don't think the Charger.
Oh no, wasn't
that one wasn't struck either. So.
Yeah. So we're good.
So, one of the things that cops usually like to do, well, I don't know, I wouldn't say they like to do it. One of their jobs is catching people who are driving while impaired. And when the infrastructure bill was passed in 2021, one of the things that was stuck in there was a requirement for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to put together rules by 2026 that would require anti-drunk driving technology in new vehicles. Impaired driving is still one of the leading cause of traffic fatalities in the United States. Over 13,000 in 2021 were related to drunk driving, 13,000 deaths. And that's a major issue. And this is one of the reasons as well, why there's been so much effort to try to do autonomous vehicles, because automated vehicles don't drink. But in the meantime, while they're still trying to get that working, they are working on technologies to detect drunk driving. And this week, NHTSA put out a request for comment, and there'll be a link in the show notes for companies to or for anybody to comment on the proposed regulations, which are targeted 2026. But I've had demonstrations of a number of different technologies. I had in one approach is actually using the driver monitor systems that they're using for the systems like Super Cruise and Blue Cruise.
Right.
To detect, if the driver is, looking at the driver's eyes and head pose, to look for things like drowsiness, impairment, indications of that. But I also got a demo this past summer from Magna of a sensor that they've developed that detects certain things in the driver's breath. So it's not like a breathalyzer that the police would use that you blow into. You don't. The driver doesn't have to actively do anything. It's mounted by the steering wheel, and just it's detecting, I forget what it is, certain compounds in the driver's breath when you exhale, and if it detects a certain concentration of those compounds, it will prevent the car from starting. And so, and one of the things, breathalyzers like the police use, those require occasional periodic calibration.
Right.
They have to do some maintenance, replacing filters and things like that on them. That's not the case with this type of sensor. It doesn't require any calibration, doesn't require any maintenance. And so those are the types of solutions that they're trying to find to do this stuff. You got any thoughts on this technology?
It's going to be interesting to see what works and is repeatable, and with people over time. And we've been talking about affordability on vehicles, and this is going to add cost for sure. And that means the consumer has to kind of decide. And so, I mean, if it's mandated, it's mandated. But what do you not do? How do you keep your vehicles affordable when you're adding this technology? And that's a safety question we've had for almost any safety feature we've added into it. It doesn't sound like, it's on paper, like, do it, save those 13,000, make it all work. But there's cost to it, and I think there's going to be a significant requirement to prove that it works, and that it's not picking up false positives.
Yeah, that's the key.
That's
false
the
positives.
Key. The false positives, if those are too high, you really, you can't have people not being able to drive their vehicles when they're sober. Deterring impaired driving is a good thing. That's a good thing. Like, that's great.
Yeah.
But
no complaints about that.
No complaints about that at all. But and can we prove out the technology well enough in a 2-year period when it's not really in use? I mean, we're going to find out. We're really going to find out how well it works when you've got millions of people. When you mandate it for 26 model year and you then sell 16 million units that year, that's when you're going to really find out which system is truly reliable, and which one is not. And it's probably not just going to be one system.
Right. It's probably going to be a combination of breath detection and the driver monitor, because the nice thing about the driver monitor systems is, in addition to potential impairment, they can also detect drowsiness or distraction, right, or a medical emergency, which you're not going to get with other systems.
Right. So it's, it make people safer is always good, but the implementation is going to be the challenge. And maybe it just goes smoothly. That's possible. And, everything does.
Yeah. And the question is, how much of a tolerance are you going to allow? I mean, the legal limit in the United States is 0.8% blood alcohol content, which is fairly low level, but it's enough to cause, issues with driving. Yeah. But, if you have the potential for false positives, you've got to build some tolerance in there. And so how much is NHTSA going to allow above that 0.8, before you detect, does it have to detect at 0.1, 0.15, what threshold will they allow to try to minimize the false positives? Because you're going to have some tolerance in there.
That's a really good question and a really good point too. Like that, the point at which it doesn't let you start the car doesn't necessarily have to be the legal limit. It could be set to that level where you're more likely to have even more accidents, right? You're really trying to stop the person who's totally, I mean, there's some tolerance in there, and how tight is it, is going to play into it as well. So that's going to be an interesting one. And we're going into an election year. Does this not scream one of those things that's going to turn into a political football in about 5 minutes?
Oh, it absolutely.
Will. And the message of safety may get lost a bit in there. Yeah. But it is the mandate. So they've got to at least look for it and try and figure something out.
Yeah.
Speaking
of safety, we had a big recall this week of 2 million Tesla vehicles to try to address problems with their driver monitoring capability with autopilot. And I think I did 5 or 6 interviews on Tuesday when it was announced with various media. And the way they're doing, the fundamental problem is, that Tesla markets autopilot and FSD, in a way that, they say in the fine print, when you use it, your driver's responsible. You got to keep your hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. But they've never really done a very good job of actually enforcing that. And when I was an engineer, one of the things I was always taught was you have to anticipate the way, especially working on things like ABS or stability control systems, you have to anticipate the way that drivers are going to potentially misuse the system and design the system in a way to mitigate the effects of that. And that's something that I think Tesla has never really done. They've said, you're responsible. Tough luck if anything happens.
Yeah.
And, so, when you look at things like Super Cruise, where they have capacitor sensors in the steering wheel, an infrared camera for driver monitoring, and various other things that they're looking at. And then Tesla uses a torque sensor in the steering column.
Mm-hmm.
And until the last couple of years, they didn't use a camera at all, but they only have an RGB camera, visible light camera, that is actually very easy to fool, as Consumer Reports demonstrated, by just holding up a picture of yourself in front of the camera. There have been lots of entrepreneurs out there, selling little weights that you can hang on the steering column that, or videos showing people just stuffing an orange into the steering wheel, or a bottle of water, because that extra weight in there, when the auto steer is working, that's just enough to counteract and make the torque sensor think, oh, driver's got their hands on the wheel. That's never been a good solution for detecting hands on the wheel. And it's not entirely clear, so Tesla's doing an over-the-air software update. They're not actually changing any hardware on these vehicles. It's not entirely clear exactly what they're changing.
Right.
And, I think that this is going to end up being a big nothing. It's not actually going to have any real impact, because if they change it too much, their customers are going to complain, and then they'll end up changing it back. And the thing is, everything in this recall is stuff that was highlighted by the National Transportation Safety Board back in early 2017, when they completed their investigation of the crash that killed Joshua Brown, the first known fatal crash with autopilot. They recommended all this stuff, that there should be better driver monitor systems and geofencing of the systems. And NHTSA did nothing then. And if they had done something back then in 2016, 2017, if they had just done what NTSB recommended, at that point, there were probably only about 40 or 50,000 vehicles on the road with autopilot. If they had mandated for Tesla and other manufacturers to use an infrared driver monitor camera and capacitor sensors, they could have had that on before they started production of Model 3, which is when Tesla's sales volumes really took off. And this wouldn't have been an issue. It would have fixed a lot of the problems they've had over the last 6 years.
So NHTSA could have acted faster. Tesla could have just done it.
Yeah, well, we know they don't like to spend money if they don't absolutely have to.
Nobody does.
Yeah. No.
But
other manufacturers are, even though they aren't legally required to do it, they've done it anyway.
And the difference, I think, between the way that Tesla treats something like that and the way that Ford and GM are treating something like that, or Mercedes, is 100 years of history. Mm-hmm. You've gone through ignition switch recalls. You've gone through side saddle fire recalls. You've gone through gas tanks, side saddle gas tanks. You've gone through other, tons of recalls, and Ford's gone through the Firestone tire debacle. There's any number of these that they've gone through. Toyota's gone through unintended, and it's all acceleration accusations because the carpet wasn't quite right. Audi went through that. And Tesla hasn't done any of that. So they haven't had that big $1 billion, oh no, I really have to fix this sort of scenario. And even this, with Tesla doing an over-the-air update, it's not going to pop in their financials, I don't think.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a big deal.
Yeah, because they don't have to change any hardware. They don't have to bring cars into the dealers, their service centers or anything.
So they're still not, even though this is 2 million vehicles, they're still not having that moment that really rocks them as a company and that really hits them. And I don't know when or where it'll be by law of averages. It seems like it should happen at some point. Part of it has to do with how many vehicles are on the road. And 2 million apparently is the number that NHTSA decided to pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, that's how many were sold in the U.S., since they launched autopilot.
Right. And if you look at the earlier numbers in 16 and 17, there weren't very many vehicles on the road, and NHTSA is about numbers too. Mm-hmm. If it's not a huge impact, that's part of their math. how many people, how many vehicles could this impact? If it's going to impact 15 vehicles, maybe we don't care. I mean, that plays into some of when you look at the reports as you have, that plays into it as well. So I think that is one of the differences between the way that Tesla operates and the way that the traditional guys do. The traditional guys understand that that not taking safety seriously is gonna hit the bottom line, and they're gonna have a massive problem down the road. And they do. I mean, nobody wants a vehicle to be unsafe, but it changes the thing. The lawyers are there for a reason, and you only start really bringing them in after you've figured out that you need them. And Tesla hasn't figured out they need them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the result is Super Cruise and Blue Cruise are really good. And Blue Cruise still disengages too quickly, but Super Cruise is just amazing.
And I still have complaints about Ford using a torque sensor instead of capacitor sensors in Blue Cruise, but they do at least have the driver monitor system, which works really well. All right. One more Tesla story. This one popped up on Motor Trend this week. It's about a German driver, Hans-Jörg von Gemmingen-Hornberg, who drives a 2014 Tesla Model S. Before that, he had a first-generation Roadster. He claims he put 400,000 miles on the Roadster, which is impressive for that vehicle. But he has had 1 million miles on his 2014 Model S, which is pretty amazing. However, reading the actual story and getting into the details of it, I've seen other vehicles where drivers have put 1 million miles. I know a few years ago Toyota was doing an event at their tech center here, and they had a Tundra that they had bought back from a customer. That the customer had gone 1 million miles with it. Nissan had a Frontier with 1 million miles on it, and those were they still had the original engine, the original transmission, and so on. This one is more like a Tesla of Theseus. You know the story of the ship of Theseus, right? Where if you take a ship and over time you've replaced every plank multiple times, it is still the original ship. Well, this Model S, let's see, the rear drive motor has been replaced 13 times. For an average of 84,000 miles per motor. The battery pack has only been replaced 3 times. So you got 300,000 miles per pack with the battery, which is actually that's actually very impressive. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah.
And assorted other parts that have been replaced over the years. It's hard to say that there's. I mean, clearly, the platform that the chassis, has been pretty robust. But that's, as long as you can avoid things like rust, which, the Model S is made of aluminum, so rust isn't going to be so much of a problem. That's not that hard to do. But 300,000 miles per battery is pretty impressive.
Decent.
And I think, that part of the story at least should assuage a lot of fears that people have about having to replace batteries in EVs, because that is clearly a concern. Batteries are not inexpensive, and if you have to replace them, that's going to be a problem. But if you got to replace your drive motor every 80,000 miles,
that's expensive.
Yeah, that's not great. A few of them were replaced under warranty, but after that, he did have to spend his own money.
And even under warranty, then you've got hassle, and it still doesn't seem right. You know? It's you don't change your transmission every 80,000 miles.
No, hopefully not.
I don't know. Yeah, that's true. Hopefully not. Not without. So I agree that the 300,000 miles on the battery pack is strong. And it's a bit of a Theseus product, but still, it's an interesting proof point, an interesting conversation. I do. The longevity of EVs is still a question compared to ICE. I mean,
but I think
we were just talking about Crown Vics.
Yeah, that's true.
But on the road for 30 years, and whatever, and you've got 400 of them that are 10, 13 years old and still going into service. it's still a little bit out. I think the electronics and stuff are probably not going to see the same kind of longevity that an engine.
That's probably the bigger issue. Yeah, is going to be the electronics. I know, certainly some of the early vehicles with electronic systems, have had some challenges being able to be kept on the road. A more extreme case, the McLaren F1, from the mid 1990s, they only built 106 of those. But one of the things, with the engine management system on that, what they had special software that they developed to be able to check the engines and maintain them and everything. But it only runs on a particular model of compact laptop from the early 1990s.
Right.
And so technicians that work on these, they have to have a stockpile of these old compact laptops in order to be able to talk to the engine management system in the McLaren F1. Now, like I said, there's only 106 of those cars, and they're right. $1 million when they were new, and they sell for upwards of $10 million these days. But, there have been previous stories about trying to keep even the Tesla Roadsters running and a lot of other vehicles. So as vehicles get more and more software defined, I think we're going to see more of that.
I know. And when we talk about software defined vehicles, the focus has been on over the air updates and how you can constantly update. And I'm like, no, you do hit a wall. Mm-hmm. There's always a wall where that processor can't do what the next generation software is. I mean, I'm an iPad owner, and eventually there's a point where you just can't update it.
The old hardware just won't support the new software.
Won't support the new software, and it's not a decade.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So that when I look at vehicles, I think about that. And Ford and GM and all of the others saying, but we're just going to have over the air updates. Your car's always going to be fresher. It's always going to be better. I'm like, always is a long time.
Up to a point.
And up to a point, and that point is not a 15-year life cycle of a traditional vehicle that we have now. That point is probably 7 or 8 years. But the interesting thing though about it too is even if you can't update it and get another part of software in there, hopefully the performance doesn't degrade. When you look at an iPad, if you update or an iPhone or whatever, if you get too far in the system, you'll get a software operating system that won't work. Hopefully that's not necessarily the case. So if you've got a Blazer EV that's, we're talking about this in 7 years, and you get to a point where that Blazer maybe can't take one of the new features, as long as the current set doesn't degrade.
Yeah.
You
don't want to lose features.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't want to lose features, not on a vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, an iPad is something it's replaceable. It's not running my life. It's something I do stuff with. It's not something I'm going to take my cats to the vet in.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a vehicle, they've got a whole series of things that have to happen, and safety and performance are there. So you can't lose features like that.
Yep. All right. One last story for this week, and then we've got one listener question from Autocar in the UK. The VW has just shown a concept of the new ID2, which is their smaller sort of polo-sized EV that's coming out. And one of the big complaints about the ID3 and the ID4 and VW's other EVs has been the touch-sensitive controls along the bottom of the screen, the center screen, for things like volume and climate control and everything. And that's been a complaint for a lot of vehicles. I know, on some of the recent Hyundais, the current generation Tucson and Santa Cruz, and that they also have touch sensitive controls. And VW is bringing back physical buttons. So on this ID2, it's got a row of physical controls, and that's one of the things that the Blazer talked about is keeping physical controls for volume and climate control and things like that you use all the time. Keeping those physical. And that shift back towards a more balanced mix of physical and touch controls, I'm all for it. Definitely.
I'm all for it too. And we keep doing it.
Yeah.
We keep taking the buttons away, and then you're like, oh wait, no, we'll put them back. Honda with their button and their control that drove everyone crazy.
We've got that in our Civic. Yeah.
We'll put that back. Hey, vehicle designers, stop taking buttons away. Let it go. Give us buttons, because there's still physical controls for certain things that just are easier and faster and better. And I think that's important. One of the controls on the Blazer, did you end up with the conversation? So Blazer is one of those vehicles, EV, of course, that you get in and, you put your foot on the brake and it starts, and you get out and its sensors turn off when you exit the vehicle. That always freaks me out. I have
there's no stop start button.
No off.
There is there's
no off, and I don't mind it when you get in and it just starts and goes. I'm never convinced it's turned off when I get out. But Blazer has on the screen, and it is a layer in, so you do have to push something to get it, but you can turn it up. So for those people who, like me, kind of forget, no, there's an off button for the car.
But there's also the extend mode, which they also have on the Silverado. They're going to put it on all their EVs, which allows you to keep the power on for 60 minutes.
Yes, which is good too.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got your dog in the car and you need to run into the store, you can put that on, keep the air conditioning on, and Tesla's had their dog mode for years, and Rivian's got a similar mode in their vehicles.
Yeah. Well, you just I forgot something in the house and I get out and I don't really want to turn everything back on, just keep going for a couple minutes. So yeah, that's neat too, but digress from the physical buttons. Yes, let's just have an agreement that all screen control vehicle is a bad idea. And you can't, and the subset of I'm going to take away all the controls, but I'll enable voice control is also not a great solution.
Yeah, doesn't work for everything. It's not as reliable as it needs to be.
No, and I think there's enough people that don't use voice. There's a lot of people that do. There's a lot of people that don't. That's not a ubiquitous enough behavior to say, nope, all my owners are just going to change the radio station by voice, so they don't need a button. I don't think I don't think that enough people are consistent enough. And I say that because I've seen my friends use voice and I never do.
Yeah.
So, okay, case of one. Some people I see do it, and I don't like talking in my car or my house for that matter.
I'm back and forth. And some things, if I'm using navigation, with Google Maps, I'll say, hey, Google, sorry about that for anybody that's listening in their car or whatever. I just triggered their devices. But I'll call up the assistant and say, hey, navigate to wherever, and so especially if I'm already on my way somewhere, and I just need the details for the last part of the trip, so you don't have to stop and tap it on the screen or anything like that.
Yeah.
Use that, but for most other stuff, I use physical controls where I can.
Yeah, and so I don't text when I'm driving because I don't like using voice to text. Mm-hmm. And it's been one of those things where it's designed so you don't have to look and you can't see and all of that. But, I work with words for a living. And so when I speak it and it reads it back, first of all, it doesn't understand me half the time. But when it does, I can't see it. It drives me crazy that I can't see if there's a period where I said there's a period, or that I can't see what it's doing. Mm-hmm. And so just hearing it repeat it back to me and saying send, just is not comfortable for me. So I don't text when I drive because I can't use it, because I don't like to use the voice.
Yeah. The only time I do that is just for, if I need to, send my wife, a quick update,
on my way
late, or, just, acknowledge, if she sent me a text, stop and pick something up, just a quick acknowledgement, but that's it. I don't send long, my writing can be fairly verbose, and I don't send those kind of text messages with voice.
No, you can't. No, I find that. But, if you met me, if I said anything, then it goes short.
All right. We got one listener question, and it's from Stephen in Illinois, and says, I have a dilemma. We would very much like to purchase a plug-in hybrid in the near future, as our two cars are both nearly 10 years old. I'm sure our use case is very common, and we don't know quite what to do. We have a 2014 Prius with 70,000 miles on it, and a 2015 Subaru Outback with 85,000 miles. We do mostly local driving now, with an annual drive to Florida and or the East Coast, and occasional trips to Wisconsin. I need a bigger vehicle to haul a recumbent trike places once in a while. We'd like to replace the Prius with some type of EV or plug-in hybrid and keep the Outback mainly for trike hauling duty. Unfortunately, we cannot get access to charging at our designated parking spot in our underground garage. We live in a retirement community in the Chicago area composed of 90 independent living units in a 4-story building. There are two new level 2 chargers above ground outside our building, somewhat problematic in the winter. My question is, our RAV4 Prime or Prius Prime, is there one single battery handling both hybrid and EV driving duty, such that eventually this single battery will be recharged fully by the hybrid battery through regeneration? Or are there separate hybrid and EV batteries, and the only way to recharge the EV is plugging in? How long will it take to recharge either Prime model at a juice box? Do any plug-in hybrid models support DC fast charging? So first off,
a lot of questions.
Only one
Good
battery.
Questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
They just use one battery for EV and hybrid functionality, and this is true for all plug-in hybrids. I mean, they do still have a separate 12-volt battery for starting the engine and for other things, for low voltage stuff, but for the drive unit, just one battery. Let's see. So no separate batteries. How long would it take to recharge either Prime model at a juice box? I'm not sure what the power output of the juice box is. We assume it's like either 6 or 7 kilowatts, maybe 9 kilowatts, probably about 2 to 2.5 hours. Let's say 2 to 3 hours. If it's a low power charger, a 3 kilowatt charger, take more like about 4 or 5 hours, but it's probably a little bit faster than that. So let's say 2 to 3 hours typically. And then
You can.
Do any plug-in hybrids support DC fast charging? The only one that I know of is the Mitsubishi Outlander.
Yeah.
It has a CHAdeMO connector on it, and it actually only charges at 22 kilowatts even on CHAdeMO, and I'm not sure why they bothered putting that on there. But that is the only plug-in hybrid I know of that supports DC fast charging. All the rest are AC only.
And you can. Most of them do have a mode, so you can charge the battery while you're driving.
Yes.
Toyota's, I feel like, takes longer to charge the battery when you put it in that mode. I think Volvos are pretty quick. There's something else I was in that was very quick when it did that. But you can do that, but then you're running ice.
Yeah. Yeah, like the Jeeps, the Jeep Wrangler and Grand Cherokee 4xEs, and they have the charge mode, that you can put it into where, if you want to have, if you're going, say, like if I was going from here to Detroit and I wanted to have EV mode while I was in Detroit, I could have it charge up the battery while I'm driving, or, if you're going off-road trail and you want, the EV mode while you're off-roading, you can charge it while you're on your way. It's using more gas when it does that. It's not the most efficient way to do it, but you can do it.
So the question is, what is the general target? Is the general target for the use case to be in EV mode, or is the general target to be in plug-in hybrid mode? Because plug-in hybrids still have a bigger battery than a regular hybrid, and so you do get a little bit more efficiency. You do get a little bit more performance out of them.
You typically have more electric power with the plug-in hybrid versus a hybrid version. So
it's more support all the way through.
Yeah.
So you do get better efficiency out of them. So I can see from a hybrid perspective, even if you don't ever drive it as an EV, I think it's a stronger hybrid.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. One part of this was, if it's a single battery, will it be recharged fully by the hybrid system through regeneration? Theoretically, it could be. If you were driving down, coasting down a long enough hill, but in reality, you're not going to get enough regen to fully recharge that battery just through regen. Just because the battery's so large, in any typical driving, you're going to be accelerating, you're going to be using up that power and then replenishing it, using it, replenishing it. So you're never going to fully recharge the battery just through regen, unless you drove it up to the top of Pikes Peak and then just coasted down the hill. That's about, one of the only use cases. Any other time, once you deplete the plug-in part of the battery, then it's just going to be running just as a normal hybrid. Given this Stephen's use case, of only having access to 2 chargers outdoors, and not really, no guarantee that they're going to be able to use them, I would suggest that they might actually be better off just replacing the Prius with another hybrid. Just get a regular RAV4 hybrid, or some other hybrid, because you're gonna get enough boost in efficiency from that, and the cost premium of going to the plug-in hybrid. If you can't guarantee that you're going to be plugged in all the time and using the electricity, if you're only being able to charge it for a third or half of your miles that you drive, it's not really worth it. It makes sense. That extra cost. Yeah. It makes sense if you can plug it in all the time and you're always using the electricity. Great, absolutely go for a plug-in hybrid. In this case, I would suggest just going for a regular hybrid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes more sense of this. You're again, it's the cost differential, right? You're not going to get that cost back, in terms of what you're spending in terms of fuel, right?
Yeah, like a RAV4 hybrid, or a Tucson or an Escape, or something in that class. You can get those, for under $30,000. You're going to be looking at much closer to $40,000 or more for a plug-in hybrid version. And that $10,000, you're never going to get that back unless you are always using it with electricity.
Right. And it doesn't sound like the use case that he presented really needs a pure EV mode often.
Yeah. Well, it says, they're mostly driving around town.
So you can use it then. Yeah.
Yeah. A 10-year-old car with 70,000 miles, they're not accumulating a lot of miles. So if you could plug it in all the time, if you can guarantee you plug it in all the time, then you actually probably it would make sense, because you could do pretty much all your driving except for those occasional trips to Florida.
Right.
With just electricity. But it's that being able to plug in.
There's also Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's cold.
Yeah.
So in the wintertime, maybe not.
But again,
maybe.
A Prius Prime, you got 40 miles of electric range. Even in the wintertime, you're still going to have
that. Even if you drop to 20 or
30, 25, even 20.
Yeah.
So it's still going to meet most.
It should be close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So take that for what it's worth, Steve. Thanks for calling or for writing in, and you can send in your questions to feedback@wheelbearings.media, or if you want to record your questions, do that. Send us a voice recording. We're happy to use that in the show here. And don't forget, you can get your Wheel Bearings T-shirts and phone cases and stuff at shop.wheelbearings.media. We got lots of interesting stuff there. So thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.
Everyone's talking about AI these days, right? This season on Compiler, we're diving deep into how AI is reshaping the world we live in. Join us for a new season of Compiler, an original podcast from Red Hat. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
All you homeowners have unique needs. Some feel the need to paint their door a vibrant shade of blue. Others have the need to decorate their bathroom with fish, anchors, and other nautical items. And because each homeowner has unique needs, Geico helps you get the right coverage for your home and what's in it. That way, you get exactly what's right for you, even if your needs are unique. Get more with Geico.